Montana Territory, September 1883. The wind kicked up dust across the dry grassland as Quentin James pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders. Eyes set on the horizon where the sun was starting to dip behind the Tobacco Root Mountains. He had been riding the same stretch of land for years now, ever since he bought the small ranch from a man too broken to keep it. The land was quiet, too quiet sometimes, but it matched him. Empty, steady, worn. He had not expected anyone to be standing by the porch when he returned that evening. But there she was. A woman, dirty from travel, hair windblown. A small boy clinging to her skirt and a girl holding a blanket close around her shoulders. The woman's eyes met his the second his boots hit the ground. "I am not asking for anything," she said before he could speak. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "Just a roof." Quentin looked at her. Really looked. Her dress was patched at the seams, her boots cracked. The boy looked to be 5, the girl maybe 7. The woman might have been his age, mid-30s, maybe a little younger. Her face was drawn, but not weak. She was holding on by threads, but she was still holding on. He took off his hat, nodded once. "You all eaten today?" The little boy peeked out from behind her leg. The woman hesitated. "No." "Then come inside." She did not say thank you, just took the children's hands and followed him into the house. Inside, Quentin lit the lamp and ladled out the leftover stew from the pot on the stove. The woman fed her children first, quietly, then ate only after they had eaten their fill. She watched them like she was afraid they would vanish. Quentin leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her the same way. "You got a name?" "Celia Whitlow," she said, not looking up. "My children are Leah and Luke." "Celia," he said it slow. The name felt solid, real. "Where you headed?" "No place in particular. Just away." She ran a hand down her daughter's back. "Their father left us in Dakota Territory. Said he was going to find work. Never came back." Quentin's jaw tightened. "How long ago?" 7 months. He nodded. There was nothing else to say to that. After the children were asleep, laid out on the cot in the corner, Celia stood by the window, arms crossed. "I can work," she said. "I can sew, patch clothes, cook, help with the horses if you show me how. You do not owe me work. I do not want pity. You are not getting it." She turned to look at him. "Then what am I getting?" He held her gaze. "A roof." Her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything. She looked back out the window. He gave her his bed that night. Took himself to the barn with a blanket and sat up beside the horses, listening to the wind push through the timbers. He had lived with regret too long to try and fix things that could not be fixed. But maybe he could give something. Something small. A roof. The next morning was quiet. Celia had already started boiling water when he came back in. The children were still asleep, curled together on the cot. She handed him coffee without a word. They settled into a rhythm. Celia kept to herself, but she worked hard. She was up before sunrise, helped with breakfast, mended his shirts without asking. She never asked for more than what he had already given, just the roof, just the room, just the space to breathe. Quentin found himself standing in the doorway more often, watching her braid Leah's hair or steady Luke's hand as he tried to write his name in the dirt. She was patient, quiet, kind, not soft. There was something steel in her, something strong. He had not seen that kind of strength in a woman since his mother died. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after they arrived, Celia stood up from the creek where she had been washing clothes and wiped her hands on her skirt. "I need to go into town." Quentin looked up from the fence he was fixing. "Why?" "I need thread, flour, salt. I can trade the quilt I made." He hesitated. "You should not go alone." "I have gone alone before." "That was before you had a roof." She stared at him. He stared back. "I will take you," he said. She nodded once. In town, people stared. Celia walked straight-backed, chin high. Quentin walked beside her, boots heavy on the boardwalk, daring anyone to speak. They left with what they needed and without trouble. On the way back, Leah dozed on Celia's shoulder in the wagon, Luke leaning against her side. Quentin drove in silence, the reins loose in his hands, the sun warm on his face. "You do not talk much," she said after a while. "No, I think I like that." He glanced over. She was not smiling, but her eyes were softer. That night, Celia sat on the porch while the children slept. Quentin brought out 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside her. The stars were out bright, the air cool. "You lost someone?" she asked, quiet. He looked straight ahead. "Wife, child. Long time ago." She did not say she was sorry, just nodded. "I tried to forget it." He took a sip. "But forgetting does not work." "No," she said. "It does not." They sat a long time without speaking. Then she said, "You are kind." "No," he said. "I am just tired of being alone." She looked over at him. Her hand rested on the porch rail, fingers close to his. He did not move. Neither did she. When he stood, he looked at her and said, "Sleep well, Celia." She said, "Good night, Quentin." That was the first night he dreamed of her. Not in a sinful way. Just her face, her voice, her hands braiding Leah's hair. The sound of her laugh, he had not even heard it yet, but he dreamed it anyway. He woke up smiling, and for the first time in years, the regret in his chest felt just a little lighter. The first frost came early that year. Quentin noticed it before dawn when he stepped outside and found the pump handle stiff with cold. He worked the lever until water groaned up from the earth, steam rising as it hit the bucket. Celia came out a moment later with a shawl wrapped around her and stood near the porch rail, watching the sky go pale. "I'll need to line the children's boots today," she said. "Their toes were near frozen yesterday." "I've got deer hide in the tack room," Quentin said. "Soft enough for linings." She gave a small nod and turned to go back inside. The door closed behind her without a sound. By mid-morning, she had the boots beside the stove, drying after stitching in the new lining. The children were outside, dragging sticks through the dirt and chasing each other around the corral. Quentin worked near the barn, sawing planks for a new chicken coop. He had never needed one before, but Celia had bartered eggs in town 2 weeks back and said she could keep hens if he built her a place for them. It hadn't felt like a request. When he straightened to stretch his back, she was standing a few yards off, wiping her hands on a rag. "You always build things alone?" she asked. He set the saw down. "Most times. You don't have to." She didn't wait for permission. Just picked up the other end of the plank and helped him steady it while he nailed it in place. She didn't speak again until they were halfway through the frame. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. "Sometimes." He didn't look at her. "But I never do." "Why not?" "Because I'd carry it with me." She didn't answer, just held the board while he drove another nail. That night after supper, she stayed out near the fire pit long after the children had gone to sleep. Quentin joined her, dropping a few more sticks into the flames. She kept her hands close to the heat. "Leah asked me today if we're staying," she said after a while. "And what did you tell her?" "That I didn't know." He didn't say anything. "I don't want to raise them on someone else's pity," she said. "I won't." His voice was quiet. "You're not." Celia looked over at him, the firelight catching her cheekbones. "Then what are we?" He watched the flame flicker between them. People trying to make it through the winter. A pause passed between them, long and still. "I used to think if I just kept moving, things wouldn't catch up to me," she said. "But they always do. Grief, shame. The way people look at you when you've got nothing but children and a name that doesn't carry weight." Quentin stirred the fire with a stick. "Nobody here cares about names." "You do," she said, watching him. "You hide it different, but I see it. Regret sits on you like a saddle." He didn't deny it. She didn't press. After a bit, he stood and offered her his hand. She looked up at him, surprised, then took it. He helped her to her feet. Her fingers were cold. "Come inside," he said. She followed him in, quiet, her shawl still drawn close. At the door to the bedroom, she paused. "I'm not asking for anything," she said again, voice low. "You're not," he agreed. Then softer. "But you could." She didn't move for a breath, then stepped inside and closed the door behind her. He went back to the fire, sat beside it until the sky turned black and the wind shifted from the north. When he finally went in, he checked the stove, stirred the coals, and lay down on the floor near the hearth, blanket pulled to his chest. In the dark, he heard the floorboard creak once from the other room, then nothing. But the silence didn't feel as empty as it had before. The next morning, Celia was already outside with the children, pulling the first of the small logs he'd chopped for the coop. Luke balanced a hammer too big for his hand. Leah carried a basket of nails. Quentin watched them from the porch, a strange warmth settling in his chest. He hadn't known peace could look like this quiet, steady, earned inch by inch. He hadn't expected it to come in the shape of a woman who didn't want saving and children who asked no more than a place to sleep. But it had, and somehow that felt like enough. For now. Snow came in November, quiet and slow, piling soft against the split rail fence and blanketing the roof in white. The kind that muffled sound and made the world feel smaller, closer. Quentin shoveled the path to the barn each morning before the sun touched the ridge, the breath from his horse rising like smoke in the still air. Inside the house, the fire never went out. One evening, just after supper, Celia sat at the table stitching the torn edge of a curtain, while Leah helped Luke sound out words from an old primer she'd found on a shelf behind the stove. Quentin sat near the window, whittling a piece of pine into something that might become a horse if he kept at it long enough. "You always live out this far?" Celia asked, setting her needle aside. "I did once try a town near Fort Benton," Quentin said. "Didn't take to it." "What happened?" "I stopped sleeping." She looked over at him. "Why?" "Too many voices. Too many doors." Celia nodded slowly. "I know that feeling. You ever think about going back east?" he asked. She rested her hands in her lap. "When I was younger, before I met Tom, thought I might see St. Louis. Maybe teach school." "What changed?" "Everything," she said quietly. "And then more of it." He didn't ask further. Instead, he set the carving down and crossed to the fire, crouching to toss in another split log. The flames caught quick, licking up the dry bark. "I never knew my ma," Celia said after a while. "Died birthing me. My aunt raised me near Council Bluffs. She believed in hard work, quiet mouths, and not trusting men. I didn't listen to her near enough." Quentin looked up. "You think she was right?" She didn't answer right away. "I think she was tired. And I think I understand that now." Luke let out a soft snore from the cot. Leah tucked the blanket higher around his shoulders, then climbed into the other half and pulled her legs underneath her. "He's getting stronger," Quentin said. "He is." They sat with the fire, listening to the wind scratch at the shutters. "I've never seen a man stay quiet so long," Celia said. "Most fill the air just to hear themselves. I've run out of things to say most days." "That's not true," she said gently. "You just don't waste words." He looked at her then, really looked. Her face was lined from the cold, her hands raw from work, but her eyes stayed steady, clear. She wasn't asking for anything, not comfort, not promises, just sitting there near enough to warm the air around them. "When the snow melts, Quentin said. I could build a second room onto the house. Celia didn't blink. You planning to take in more strangers? No, he said, voice low. I'm not. She stood, stepped toward the stove, and poured water into a basin to wash the bit of blood from her fingers where the needle had pricked her. He watched the way she moved, smooth, careful, like someone who'd learned not to flinch. I reckon I should be clear on something, she said, drying her hands. I don't aim to be anyone's burden. Not yours. Not anyone's. You're not. Still, I should earn whatever place I keep. You already have. She turned, leaning back against the stove's edge. What about you? She asked. What is it you still want? I don't know, he said after a long moment. But I think I'd like to find out. They said nothing more after that. She banked the fire. He latched the door. And when she passed him to reach her room, her hand brushed his forearm, just enough to be certain. That night, he lay awake on the cot near the hearth, listening to the wind press against the walls. And for the first time in years, he wasn't waiting for something to leave. He was waiting for something to stay. The wind shifted eastward in late December, carrying the smell of pine and the bite of colder storms still waiting in the mountain passes. Quentin carried an extra wood before dusk that Tuesday, stacking it near the hearth while Celia tied a string of dried apples along the mantel. The children had fallen asleep early, worn out from trudging through snow to gather kindling. You ever keep Christmas? She asked, adjusting one of the slices. Not in a long time, he said, brushing snow from his sleeves. Not since I was a boy. Celia stepped back, eyeing her work. Leah asked if we'd do something for it. She doesn't remember much from before. What did you tell her? That we'd try. He watched her fingers work the twine, tying the last loop with a careful tug. I've got an old fiddle in the barn loft. Belonged to my brother. Could bring it down if it still holds a tune. She looked over, surprised. You play. I did once. Might still remember enough to get a song out of it. I'd like that. Quentin found the fiddle that night, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked behind a crate of rusted tools. The strings were brittle, but he replaced them one by one and tuned it by ear, the way his brother taught him before the war. When he brought it inside, Celia was sitting by the stove, mending a tear in Luke's trousers. Thought I'd forgotten the sound of one of those, she said. My father had one. Only thing he was gentle with. Quentin sat near the fire, ran the bow across the strings once, slow. The sound was raw, but true. He adjusted the pegs and began to play low and steady. Not a carol, just an old waltz that filled the room without asking for anything. She didn't speak, just listened. Her needle paused. Her shoulders loosened. The next morning, Celia stood at the table rolling out dough with an old bottle. We'll need lard if I'm to finish these. I'll head to town this afternoon, Quentin said. If the pass is clear. Celia looked up. Go careful. He left afternoon, taking the wagon slow through the snow-packed trail. The trip took longer than usual, the roads slush-heavy and the wind sharp. By the time he reached the mercantile, the sky hung low and gray. Inside, he bartered venison strips and a length of cured hide for lard, molasses, and a small tin of cinnamon. He was tying the bundles when he heard his name. James. He turned. Sheriff Danner stood by the stove, arms crossed. Heard you've got company out your way. Quentin didn't answer. Woman and 2 young uns. No word of her in these parts before. She's not looking for trouble. Didn't say she was. The sheriff's mouth tightened. Just saying folks notice when someone new stays through winter. Quentin picked up the sack. She's under my roof. Danner nodded slowly. Then I reckon that makes her your concern. On the way back, the sky let loose a slow drift of snow. Quentin kept the reins loose, eyes on the trail, but his jaw stayed tight. When he returned, Celia opened the door before he could even knock snow from his boots. "You're late," she said, voice low. "Storm held me up." She took the bundle from his hands without looking inside. "I started to worry." He stepped into the warmth, shut the door behind him. "I told the sheriff you were under my roof." She stilled. He set his hat on the peg. "He's not coming out." "You sure?" "He won't try me." Celia looked down at the sack, then back up. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She turned toward the stove, but her hands trembled as she untied the lard tin. Quentin stepped closer. "You're not a secret, Celia." She kept her back to him. "I've been one before." "Well, you're not now." When she turned, her eyes were wet but steady. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything." The silence between them thickened, but it wasn't empty. It held something growing, rooted deep. That night, Celia braided Leah's hair by the fire while Luke traced letters in an old seed ledger. Quentin played the fiddle again, slower this time, more certain. The room filled with the scent of cinnamon and wood smoke, and something else, something warmer. Later, after the children were asleep, Celia stood in the doorway of the bedroom, one hand resting lightly on the frame. "I don't know what this is yet," she said. "You don't have to," Quentin said. "But I want to." He rose from the chair, crossed the room slow. She didn't step back. He touched her hand. She let him. Outside, snow fell quiet over the roof, burying the world inch by inch. Inside, the warmth held steady. Earned, not offered. Shared, not spared. And in the stillness, they stood side by side, no longer waiting for something to end, only beginning to believe in what might come next. The morning thaw came late that winter, slow and gray and stubborn. In the yard, the snow still clung in patches along the fence posts, but the creek had begun to run again, whispering beneath the thin crusts of ice. Quentin stood beside the corral gate, rubbing linseed oil into the saddle leather, while Leah threw a stick for the dog that had wandered up from the canyon 2 weeks back and never left. Luke sat cross-legged in the dirt, studying a beetle that had emerged from under the warmed stones. Celia emerged from the house with a basket of shirts to dry, her sleeves rolled to the elbow and her skirt pinned up to clear the mud. When she reached the line, she looked over at Quentin. "I've been thinking," she said, pinning the first shirt. "About school." He set the saddle down. "For Leah and Luke? For the other children, too. The few miles between ranches won't seem so far come spring. There's land behind the church that's never used. I could ask Pastor Miller if I might teach there a few days a week." "You want to stay," Quentin said. She nodded, not looking away. "If you'll have us." "I already do." Celia's eyes softened, and for the first time in weeks, her shoulders eased without weight. She finished hanging the shirts, then crossed to him and leaned her hip against the fence rail. "I've still got a way to go," she said. "But I think I might like the path better with someone beside me." "You think I'm good at walking beside people?" "I think you're better at it than you know." He met her gaze, then reached for her hand, calloused and warm. "Then let's walk." By March, the snow gave way to rain, and the earth turned soft beneath the hooves. Quentin planted early potatoes in the back field, with Luke trailing behind to toss in seed. Leah helped Celia patch together a second quilt from worn shirts and torn muslin, their laughter drifting through the open windows. One evening, Quentin came in from the barn with a small box, worn at the corners. He placed it on the table between them as she stirred beans over the stove. "I built this for her," he said, "for the child we lost. It was meant to hold her picture, but we never had one." Celia turned, wiping her hands. "Why are you showing it to me now?" "Because I want to fill it with something new." She opened the box. Inside, folded carefully, was a paper with her name written in his hand. Beneath it, a silver ring simple, polished, set with a pale blue stone the color of spring sky. "I didn't think I'd ask again," he said, "but I'm not the man I was." She touched the ring but didn't pick it up. "You sure you want the weight of all I bring?" "I want the weight. I want the quiet. I want the years." She didn't answer, just slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit. The wedding was held under the cottonwoods behind the house, with Pastor Miller reading from a worn Bible and Leah tossing wildflowers beneath the trees. Luke stood solemn in a too large vest, holding the dog's collar tight. A handful of neighbors came, bringing jars of pickled vegetables and a pie that didn't survive the trip. No one said much, but the looks they shared said enough. Quentin and Celia stood hand in hand, the sun warm on their backs, the wind carrying the scent of thawed earth and pine. That night, after the children were asleep and the guests had gone, Celia stood barefoot on the porch, her shawl slipping from one shoulder. Quentin wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin near her temple. "There's peace in this," she said. "There is. I didn't know it would feel like this, quiet, steady, like breathing easy. You've earned it." She turned in his arms, resting her hands at his chest. "So have you." Inside, the fire crackled low. The house, once hollow, now held warmth in its bones. The weight of voices, the shape of laughter, the sound of a fiddle played not for ghosts but for the living. Years passed. Celia taught children for miles around, her lessons filled with patience and firm kindness. Quentin's herd grew modestly, enough to keep them fed and the barn full. Luke learned to fish the deeper parts of the creek, and Leah read every book Quentin could trade for. They took in a few hens, then a milk cow. Celia planted sunflowers along the eastern fence, and each summer, their golden heads followed the light across the sky. And in the evenings, when the chores were done and the children tucked away, Quentin would sit beside Celia with her hand in his and the silence between them filled with everything they'd chosen. The past laid to rest, the present held close, and the years ahead waiting like open land. They lived that way together, steady and unshaken for all the seasons they were given.